thanks so much to all of you. What a delight it is to be here. I've been looking forward to this. It's an honor for me to have you share just a few minutes of your time with me. I admire the conscious capitalism movement, and in point of fact, I want to tell you this morning how I understand conscious capitalism and how it's changed my life and how it's changed my work. John gave you a little background into a relatively unconventional past. It turns out that the typical road to running a free market think tank is typically not through being a professional French horn player. And the way that worked, when I was a kid, that's really what my dream was, to be a professional musician. I did the absolute minimum that I had to do to get through high school. I reluctantly went to college and promptly was invited to leave. Kicked out or dropped out is a point of some contention. Exactly what happened. And I left college and pursued my dream as being a professional French horn player, and that path took me to the Barcelona Symphony after playing chamber music and for a couple of years on the road with a jazz guitar player named Charlie Bird. So I had kind of a weird time professionally when I was in my 20s. In my late 20s, it occurred to me that it would be a good idea if I started to study. Maybe if I got a college degree or learned something more about the world, at least about something intellectually, I might have a different kind of future. So I started doing that, and when I was studying, when I went back to college by correspondence, I was obligated to take a course in economics, which I really didn't want to do. But I took it anyway, and it changed my life. And I'm going to tell you how that course changed my life. I mean, when you're a professional classical French horn player in the Barcelona Symphony, it's the best life ever, you'd think, right? It turns out that what I really needed to do to serve people as much as possible, I learned from an economics course. And I want to tell you about that epiphany, which is the core, for me, of conscious capitalism. And really it comes down to a question that I'd always had since I was a kid. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I was growing up in Seattle, Washington, in a lower middle class or working class family. And I remember I had this first vision of actual poverty. I mean, we talk a lot about poverty in our movement. You do. You hear about it a lot from the stage. But I remember the first time I saw actual poverty. And it was, for a lot of you who are my age, it was a picture in the National Geographic magazine. Now, to be sure, most of the people living around me were single-parent families. There were a lot of people on food stamps. But that wasn't real poverty. Real poverty is the picture I saw in the early 1970s from the ghastly East African famine that was going on at that time. It colored a whole generation in our view of what poverty really looked like, the face of poverty. And I remember it distinctly. It was a picture I saw of a kid my own age who had flies on his face and a distended belly, and he wasn't going to survive. That was the point of the picture, was that he was going to die, and there was nothing that I could do about it. Now, I grew up, and I went to high school and dropped out of college and started my career and started a family. And occasionally I would think back to that kid and ask, what happened to him while I grew up? What happened to the poorest people in the world? Now, if you ask the average American, what has happened to the poorest people in the world since the 1970s, 70% of Americans will tell you that hunger has gotten worse since we were kids. When I finally studied economics in my late 20s, the one question that I had answered was, what happened to the poorest people in the world, which I always wanted the answer to. See, I had been traveling a lot, as a professional French horn player. I would travel all over the world, to the developing world, and the one question I always had was, how do people stop being poor? Typically you say, why are people poor? Interesting. More interesting, why are some people not poor? That's the really interesting question. Historically, until a few hundred years ago, almost everybody in the whole world was poor. And then suddenly people stopped being poor. Why? What did that? That's what I learned the answer to. Why does people stop being poor? And what happened to the poorest people in the world since I was a kid? Here's what I learned. I learned that from when I was a child until I was an adult, the percentage of the world's population living on $1 a day or less, which is to say starvation level wages, that percentage had declined by 80%. That is a completely novel concept to most Americans, that poverty has been reduced at its worst level, starvation levels, by 80% since we were kids. literally the greatest anti-poverty achievement in the history of humanity has occurred since everybody in this room has been alive, and most of us didn't know it. So the question was, next, what did that? By the way, that's 2 billion of our brothers and sisters who have been pulled out of poverty around the world. It's a miracle. So if you want to get the next 2 billion people out of poverty, you have to explain the first 2 billion and then replicate it. So I'm in search of an answer now when I'm studying what got those 2 billion people out of poverty. And I don't want a political answer. I don't want a controversial answer. I just want the answer to this question. And so I'm looking at what right-wing people and left-wing people are saying about it. I want to know what everybody agrees on. Pulled 2 billion people out of poverty for the first time in human history. And I found the answer. I'm going to share it with you right now. First, what was it not? It was not the fabulous success of the United Nations, good as it is, or the World Bank, or the International Monetary Fund, or USAID, or central planning. It wasn't any of those things, good or bad, you decide. It was 5 things, according to all economists, that pulled 2 billion people out of starvation since we were kids. Number 1, globalization. Number 2, free trade. Number 3, property rights. Number 4, rule of law. Number 5, entrepreneurship. It was quite simply the proliferation of what people understand as the American free enterprise system spreading around the world after 1970. You see, because of the explosion of the means of communication, people like us saw people in poorer parts of the world and said, oh, it's a pity. But those people saw you and said, I want that freedom and I want that stuff, and they pulled themselves up by copying the system that you have worked for in your business lives. Now, that's important to understand because, you know, we all believe in charity. I've worked a great deal in the nonprofit sector, and I believe in it spiritually. It's very important to me in my life. But you also, and more importantly, you have to have a system that works while you sleep. A system that works even when you're not trying to make it work. And it is only the free enterprise system that will pull our brothers and sisters out of poverty by the billions. Now, why is that insight important? Because if I want to be a social justice warrior for the least of these, our brothers and sisters around the world, I have to be a warrior for that system and to push it not just to the rich, but to the periphery of society. I'm not naive. I'm not going to tell you that it's perfect, and I'm not going to tell you that we don't need government and we don't need regulation, because we do need those things, of course, and markets fail. But we need to have confidence in this system, and we need to be warriors for that system if we love the poor. That insight made me leave, believe it or not, music and become an economist. Because I wanted my career to have meaning, and I wanted to serve more, and I wanted to share that belief. Okay. Now, I have very many opportunities to do that. I give 175 speeches or something a year. It's a great opportunity to talk about things that matter a lot, and I'm on college campuses a lot. And when I talk about social justice and pulling people out of poverty, kids on campuses are very sensible. In many ways, they're more sensible than their professors because they simply want to help people. It's terrific. When I started talking about this for the first time on campuses, kids would come up and they would say, I get it. I'm all in. I want to be a warrior for this, but I have a problem. I would hear it over and over again. I say, well, what's the problem? The problem is, how do I do that and fight for that without losing my soul? What do you mean? Well, all I hear is work, 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 earn, capitalism, capitalism. Capitalism is great, but I feel like it's kind of a hamster wheel. I feel like it's hard for me to maintain my values as a person because there are deeper things that are more important to me than that. Now, when I first heard that criticism, I didn't know quite how to respond. My first response was, why, you ungrateful little, right? What's the matter with you? And then I started hearing it from my kids, and that was a problem. Because it's my own kids. They've grown up with me. They know that I'm a big advocate for this. But, you know, I've got 3 teenagers. Pray for me. And, you know, my oldest is in college. And he says, Dad, I got it, but I really want to have a life of meaning, not just a life of earning. So how do I answer that? Now, I have to tell you, this put me into kind of an existential crisis because I work in the world of capitalism and I don't know how to talk about capitalism in the most human possible way. So I was thinking about this. This is actually about 2 years ago that I was going through this, and it was a real dilemma for me. How do I talk about my most important work? And at the time, I read a paper, I read a journal article, an academic journal article that kind of put fuel on this fire for me of my doubts. It was a paper by these 3 psychologists at the University of Rochester, these 3 social psychologists, and they were doing these experiments on undergraduate students, which you always do. You experiment on undergraduate students because they'll do anything for $20. And when they were doing the work, asking them about their goals in life. And it was an ingenious experiment. Here's how it worked. They took 150 graduating seniors, 22 years old, and they said, imagine yourself 5 years from now when you're 27. Now, imagine that you're happy. I'm not going to tell you what that means. You decide. Tell me what you're doing. Okay? Ingenious, right? Because they want to ascertain what your goals are that you think will give you the best life. What did they find? They found that there were 2 basic kinds of primary goals that the kids had. The first were what they called exogenous goals, money, power, and fame. Exogenous, fancy word, that's because they had to get tenure or something. So bear with me on the words that they're using. Exogenous goals are money and power and fame. I want to make more money than the other kids. I want to be more famous. I want to be on the management track. I want to succeed. The other half, about 75 of the 150, had endogenous goals. Those were about people and relationships and love. They said, I want to have good friendships. I want to be close to my family. Those who were religious said, I want to be close to God. Some of them said, I want to get married. They were really all about people and love, okay? Exogenous goals, endogenous goals. I'm going to ask you to remember the word endogenous goals, so I'm going to come back to that here in a second. Now, here's where it gets interesting. They followed up at the end of the 5 years, it's a long study, and asked if they'd hit their goals and how their lives were turning out. And I'm going to tell you what they found, because it's 2 things, good news and bad news. First, the good news. All the kids hit their goal. The kids who had exogenous goals to make more money, they were making more money than their peers. They were very successful. They were working really long hours. The ones who had endogenous goals had more friendships at a deeper level than their peers. They had closer relationships with their family. They were more likely to be engaged or married. They were more religious. Okay, that's the good news. It's sort of good news. I mean, your mom said, careful what you wish for. Social science says that's true. Careful what you wish for. You're going to get it. That's what it said. Here's the second finding, and this is the bad news. Wrong goals, worse life. The kids who had exogenous goals about money and power and fame had higher levels than their peers of anxiety and anger and stomach aches and headaches and lower levels of stated life satisfaction. And those who had endogenous goals of relationships and love, low levels of anxiety, low levels of anger, higher levels of life satisfaction, lower physical maladies. Wrong goals, worse life. Now, why do I tell you about that? Because I read that study and I said, it's true what these kids are telling me. I don't know how to talk about capitalism. It says capitalism is about exogenous goals, right? So I'm kind of wound up in this a couple of years ago. It's kind of a quest for me to figure out how to talk about my own life's work. At the time, I was traveling a lot. I still do. I go to India a lot for my work. AEI, my organization, has an India studies program that's really cooking. If you want to understand the real laboratory of capitalism successes, go to India, because every time you go, it gets better, right? Every time you go, even in the poorest parts of India, you find people who are lifting themselves up. It's really an extraordinary miracle, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. So I go to India a lot, and at the time when I was going through this conundrum, this question, I was on my way to India, and I was traveling with a scholar. He writes for the Wall Street Journal on India stuff. His name is Sadanand Dume. And he said, you look like you've got something on your mind. And I said, yeah, I feel like I don't know how to talk about capitalism. I'm a big enthusiast for it. I left music for it, man. But I don't know how to talk about it. And he said, you know what? When we get to India, I have a guy I want you to talk to. He has the answer to your problem, right? You got a guy. Okay, fine. So we get to Delhi, and he takes me to his guy. His guy's name is Swami Gyanmuni. I said, you're putting me on. You want me to go ask a Swami about capitalism? He says, trust me, he's the best. So we go to this temple, and it's in the outskirts of Delhi. Those of you who spent any time there, you've heard of the Swami Akshardham temple, which is, it's an architectural marvel of the modern world. It took 10,000 stone-cutting artisans working 7 years to cut it out of pure limestone. It was finished relatively recently, about 10 years ago. And I was marveling at this thing, but I was worried because I was there to talk to the Swami, and I knew I was going to have to explain something relatively nuanced. What we're talking about here is pretty complicated stuff. I didn't know whether I would get the point across to him exactly, so I'm kind of rehearsing how I'm going to talk about it. Is he going to understand me? And I see him coming toward me across this courtyard. It's a really hot day. It's in May. And he's coming across this courtyard, and I can see him, and he's shaved head and an orange robe, and he's looking really mellow. And he comes up to me, and it's about 3 yards away, and he recognizes I'm this American guy who's come to see him. I'm kind of sticking out, right? And he stops, and he says, "How you doing?" And I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "Texas." And now this is really getting weird, right? Because I've gone to India to ask a Swami about capitalism. Turns out you're from Texas. So I said, "Man, you got to tell me your story." So he does. So it turns out that his parents were petroleum engineers who had immigrated from India, and he was born in Houston. Now, like a lot of immigrant families, his parents had exogenous goals for their son. They said, "You're going to work, and you're going to earn, and you're going to succeed, and you're going to be number one." And they pushed him and pushed him and pushed him, and he said he came through. He graduated from high school, number one in his class, valedictorian when he was 16. Got a full scholarship at the University of Texas, right here in Austin. Finished his degree in 3 years. Went on to get his MBA. This is a Swami with an MBA, right? This is weird stuff. And he finished it in 1 year and went to work for McKinsey. And he said in his first year, he was making more than his dad. And his dad was very proud. Now, there were certain compensations. He worked 100 hours a week. He didn't have time for a girlfriend. He almost never saw his family. He was very tired a lot. But he said his parents were so proud that it was really worth it. Okay. Now, I know something has to have happened because I'm talking to this guy. He's not a McKinsey consultant. This guy's got a shaved head, and he has not one penny. So what's the deal? He said, "Oh, well, I worked for 5 years, and he started when he was 21. He woke up on his 26th birthday, and he said, 'Is this it? Is this it? Just work, 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 money, 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 money?' And he decided to go on kind of a spiritual vision quest. He was very religious, Hindu. He set himself up to the task of praying every day about what he's supposed to do for 6 months and then make a decision. He gets to the end of 6 months and he wakes up and he says, 'I've decided.' He sold everything he had. He gave it to the poor. He went to India, entered a seminary, and 6 years later emerged a penniless, renunciant Hindu monk. And that's where I met him. And this is the guy I've come to ask about capitalism. It's like I'm being spoofed by my buddy, right? And I know what he's going to tell me. I mean, I'm imagining his response as I'm hearing him tell this whole thing. By the way, he was calling me dude, right? And I know what he's going to say. I'm going to say, "Swami, is capitalism good? Is capitalism good?" And he's going to say, "Dude, it's a man-made prison. Do what I did. Give it up, man. Come on. Money's no good. Find yourself." I know he's going to say this. I'm walking into a trap. But I asked him anyway. I said, "Swami, is capitalism good?" And he said, "No, dude, it's great. It's the only system in history that's pulled 100 million people of my fellow Indians out of poverty in the history of humanity." And now I'm on the defensive. I'm on the other side of the argument because I'm looking at this guy. He literally can't touch money. And I said, "Yeah, but look at you. You're renunciant. You gave it all up. You turned your back on it. I mean, isn't money bad?" He says, "Dude, you don't understand at all. The problem in life isn't money. The problem in life is attachment to money." Now, at first I thought, that sounds really super Eastern. That sounds like something I would never come up with. But I already knew that. I was raised in a Christian family, like a lot of you. And let me remind you, those of you who were brought up in a religious home or who are personally religious today, the most mistranslated or misquoted verse in the Christian Bible. It's about money. It's from St. Paul in his first letter to Timothy. Here's the misquote. Money is the root of all evil. That's not the scripture. St. Paul, first letter to Timothy, chapter 5, verse 10. The love of money is the root of all evil. St. Paul and the Swami are saying the same thing. The problem is attachment. And we've always known that. If you prefer Ecclesiastes, he who loves money never has enough of it. It's attachment. It's the word in Sanskrit, which is upadana, which is the sticky craving for inadequate things, is how that's translated, upadana. It's evocative, right? That's how attachment works. And that's the problem in our lives. I said, yeah, so what's the formula for happiness? And he says, abundance is good, attachment is bad. Always seek abundance without attachment. Then you'll be fully awake. Or you might say, then you'll be fully conscious. You wonder, why is it that we forget that if we always knew that, if our mother taught us that, right? And I have an answer to why we forget that. I think there's a conspiracy. If you look at advertising or turn on the television or go to the movies, you hear the formula for the happiest life. The formula for the happiest life. You know what it is? Use people, love things, right? You know the real formula for the happy life? Substitute the nouns and the verbs. Use things and love people. That's it. Abundance without attachment. So I said, Eureka! And I came back to the United States. And immediately went on tour, and I went out to a college campus, and I said, this is it. It's what I learned from a Swami. Abundance is good. Capitalism is good. Attachment is bad. And a kid puts up his hand, and he said, how do I do that? And I said, I don't know. And it was back to the drawing board. I have since learned the two secrets to achieving abundance without attachment. And I'm going to tell you them now for your consideration, which I offer to you in a spirit of love and humility. And I'm fully confident that if you do today the things I'm about to tell you, you can achieve this, and your life will be better by after lunch today. That's how confident I am. So what are they? What are the two practices of abundance without attachment? The essence, in my view, of conscious capitalism. Practice number one. Get into your head the thing to which you are most attached. Okay? Money, power, fame, pleasure, the thing to which you're most attached. Okay? Give it away. Charity, philanthropy, is the act of rebellion against your own attachments. It's unnatural, but you must be at war with yourself, because if you aren't, you'll never achieve this hard task. Charity is the act of rebellion that gives you abundance without attachment. For years, before I came to the American Enterprise Institute, I was a professor. I was teaching economics at Syracuse University, and I did a lot of very academic work, mostly on the subject of philanthropy. Who gives more to charity, this group or that group? How do tax rates affect charity? A lot of that kind of academic stuff. And when I was doing that work, using my data and my best data analytic techniques, I always came up with this one finding over and over again that I could never understand. And here's what it was. I kept finding that the more money you give away, the richer you get. Now, that's impossible. I mean, when you get your PhD in economics, I assure you, they don't tell you that the best way to become vastly wealthy is to just give all your stuff away. That's not a prudent investment philosophy. But I kept finding it over and over and over again. I found it was causal. The more people give personally, the more they get. The more societies give, the richer they get. So I had a problem. My theory told me one thing. My data told me something else. Theory and data at odds. So I did what college professors always do. I ignored my data and stayed with my theory. I didn't publish anything on it. But I was having lunch along the way with a colleague of mine, a psychologist who did work in the same area in charitable giving. And I said, man, I got a problem. Which is never say to a psychologist, I have a problem, by the way, because they get really super interested. But I said, it's with my data. I'm doing something wrong. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. This guy was really good quantitatively. I keep finding that the more you give to charity, the richer you get. And he said, duh, we've known that for 30 years. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, we don't measure boring things like how rich you get, but we've known for 30 years that the more you give of your own personal resources, the happier you get. And the happier you get, the more you earn. Ding, the light bulb goes off. I should have known this. And as soon as he explained this to me, and by the way, there's a lot of really earthbound mechanisms to this, and neurochemical impacts on people that make them happier when they give more. They're seen more as leaders. They have a greater sense of self-efficacy when they give more because they see themselves as problem solvers. There's all kinds of reasons that you get happier. You can make yourself happier by being a more charitable person. And as soon as I realized this, I should have known it all along, I started seeing it everywhere in the literature. Give more, earn more. Give more, get happier. Give more, get healthier. My favorite studies, by the way, they show you that the more you give, the better looking you get. I promise you it's true. There's these two guys at the University of Liverpool in England, and they do laboratory experiments. And they bring men into the laboratory with their wives or girlfriends. Okay? And they bring him in, and there's a guy in a white lab coat, and he says, okay, simple experiment. Here's a pocket full of change, and he puts it into the man's pocket, and he said, the two of you, the couple, you need to walk down to that building over there, and my colleague will interview you for 10 minutes, and then you get to go keep the change. Simple experiment, okay? So they start out, each one as a couple, and they're walking between the buildings, and there's an alleyway between the buildings, and a homeless man comes walking out of the alleyway, and he panhandles the husband. Hey, buddy, you got some change? He does. It's part of the experiment. He has to make a decision. The husband has to make a decision. Do I give to the guy? And how much? Okay, they get to the next part, and there's the guy with the second lab coat. And this guy with the second lab coat is waiting, and he interviews first the husband. Did you give the homeless man change? How much? To the wife. How attractive do you find him right now? Why? Because they wanted to find the correlation between how generous you are to a stranger and how much she likes you. And what do they find? The more you give, the better looking you get. News you can use. Bottom line, do you want to detach yourself by force? Get into your mind the thing to which you're most attached. Give it away. Practice number 2 of abundance without attachment. Invest your resources in endogenous things. Your time, your talent, your treasure. Invest in endogenous relationships with the people that you love, and you will have an investment that will endure forever. I've been married for 25 years, and I'm going to tell you why. 24 years ago, my wife Esther and I, we were having a knockdown, drag-out, first year of marriage fight. Okay? What were we fighting about? We were fighting, ironically, about how to celebrate our first wedding anniversary, right? And here's the nature of the disagreement that we were having. At the time, we were poor. You look at our checking account, it was like tumbleweeds going through it. It was so empty. And my wife was working a minimum wage job, and I was teaching music during the day and studying by correspondence at night, trying to get a college degree, and we had nothing. But we wanted to do something, because we were in love, notwithstanding the fight. And here was the disagreement. My wife is from Barcelona, and she's all about the beach. And I'm a thrifty, practical American, and I thought we should use the money to get a couch. And we had just enough money either to go away for the weekend to the beach or to buy a couch, not both. This was the argument. I want to go to the beach. Let's get a couch. Beach, couch, beach, couch. And so finally we compromised and went to the beach. And that's why I've been married 25 years, but that's not my point. Here's my point. 5 years ago, on our 20th wedding anniversary, by the way, our 25th wedding anniversary is November 6th, so it's like almost literally 5 years ago on our 20th wedding anniversary, we were thinking back on it, and something weird occurred to us that we kind of referred to as the paradox of things. We finally did get a couch. That was 3 couches ago. I can't remember the first couch. What color was it? I don't know. Was it bumpy or soft? Did I take naps on it? I don't know. I don't remember. But I can tell you, and so can my wife, everything we did of every hour of that vacation, because we were in love and still are. The things that you think are permanent because they're physical are not. The things that you think are evanescent because they're an experience are permanent in the ether of your imagination. They're written on your heart. There's a commercial example of this that makes the point. The most effective commercial in the history of the credit card industry is one that you've all seen. It's been running for 40 years constantly. It's very annoying. They update it every year. It's for MasterCard. And the way the commercial goes every time is the same. It has the same formula. There's no dialogue, just a voice of God. And it's somebody doing something. So it'll be a kid getting into a car with his dad. And the voice of God says, beach ball, $3. Gas for the car, $36. 2 nights in a hotel, $275. The weekend alone at the beach with my son. It's just an ad. But it speaks truth, which is why it's effective. I could give you 12 studies that prove this, 1,200 studies that prove this, but I'm just going to give you the only study that nailed this down for me. I told you I've got 3 teenage kids. My middle son is 16. His name is Carlos. And Carlos is everybody's middle child. Carlos is a piece of work. He's running a racket all the time, right? This is the headmaster of the school. You know that Carlos is running an illicit reptile selling scheme at school, don't you? It's like that all the time. It's like, what is this? And so he's got me on edge constantly. 7 years ago, when he was 9, Carlos comes to me just about this time of year. It's in the fall, and he says, Dad, I've been thinking about Christmas. Now, with an ordinary child, you'd say, that's great. With Carlos, you know it's not in your interest. So, acting real cagey, trying to change the subject. It's good to have Christmas in your heart all year round, Carlos. Ha ha ha, what's on TV? No. He's having nothing of it. He's on task. And he says, Dad, I know you think I'm coming to you to get something really expensive, but I've been thinking about it this year. You know what I want? What? All I want is to go away fishing alone with you. And I was thinking at that moment, that costs 19 times as much as a bike. Father of the year, right? So, but that's not what I said. I said, let's do that. And we did. And we've done it every year since. That's all we do for Christmas every year. That's all he wants. This year we're going to a place in South Georgia on the Florida border, and we're going to fish for sea trout. It's going to be great. And I tell you that because I have every fish we've caught in my head practically. I can tell you every place we've gone every single year. And I could buy him a scooter or a bike, and it would be broken and forgotten after a month. But this is permanent. And he says, Dad, when you're older, I'm going to take you. And I think it's true. Do you want something permanent? Do you want abundance, true abundance without attachment? Then invest your scarce resources in the endogenous things that are really the language written on your heart because they're based in love. That's the second practice. So where are we? And I'm going to wrap up and hear what's on your mind. There is a belief in modern society about capitalism. And I know you all believe in capitalism or you wouldn't be here. But there's a belief, there's a misconception about it, that capitalism is good for rich people and bad for poor people. That's wrong. Here's the truth. Capitalism is great for poor people and dangerous for rich people. And that's what we need to take care of. What I ask you to join me in the movement for is the conscious capitalism movement. It's the social justice understanding that we need not less capitalism in the world, we need more capitalism in the world that will pull our brothers and sisters out of poverty again and again and again. But I also ask you in joining me in the movement to be conscious enough to remember that each of us is entitled to the best life, and to remember that the right exposition of capitalism is one in which abundance is not encumbered with attachment. If you can remember that, and we can remember that, then you know what? We have a new movement that transcends right and left, that transcends politics, in which we can go out confidently and say at the margins of society we have the solution, while going to our kids and looking in our own lives and say we have the secret to the happiness that each of us craves. And that's what I think is going to change our society. That's how each of you can change our society. That's the insight that changed my life. And I share it with you with gratitude because you're living it every day. You're making it possible for an economy that makes what I've just talked about possible in the first place. And for that I say, God bless you and thank you.